So many parties and so little time to make a decision. Well, if you're still undecided with just 2 weeks to go to the general elections, a new voter navigator tool has been created to help aid your choice in choosing a party. The voter tool matches you with a party that shares your views and standards about the country. So how does this voter navigator tool work? Well, let's bring in research director at the Brenthurst Foundation, Hartley, to tell us more about it. Ray, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the AM report. I think this is just the most fascinating thing, right? Talk to me about, firstly, why it was important to set up this voter navigator tool. Are South Africans still that undecided?
Yeah, I think that there are quite a lot of undecided South Africans. Probably more have decided to register and participate in this election than normal. And, you know, that just increases the pool of people who are not sure. But I also think that there's such a wide array of choices on the ballot paper. I mean, I think we're talking over 50 parties, that it can be quite a bewildering thing, I think. And also we wanted to just encourage participation in the election. You know, whatever party you support or want to vote for, the real thing is please go out and vote, participate, own your democracy, be part of it, and don't sit on the sidelines because you're unsure of who to support.
Yeah, I want to talk about how it works because, and I'd encourage as many people as possible to take it because I was quite surprised by the results that I got. But to explain how it works, Ray, let's start there.
Yeah, so there are two parts. The first part is based on a pretty exhaustive look at all of the manifestos of the parties to try and match people to policies. So there's a series of questions that are policy related. And at the end of that, you get a short list of parties that are closest to you policy-wise. But you can, if you're surprised or disappointed with that outcome, you can still add parties to that list. You then go into a phrase which is entirely in your hands, which is to rate the parties for yourself according to a series of leadership and delivery measures.
Yeah.
So, you know, how honest do you think the party is? How good do you think the party would be at governing? You know, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So the main part of the survey actually is the second part, because that's where you really get to, you know, make your own choice and, you know, rate the parties. So it's just trying to encourage a little bit more thinking than just sort of loyalty, knee-jerk reaction type of support.
Yeah, I want to just bring up the question that's on the screen right now. And obviously we're actually trying the navigator tool live. So we've got one of our team members who's actually working through it. And we might, depending on who that is, we might just find out exactly what it is that they're leaning towards. But I found the questions really, really interesting. So look at this question 5 of the navigator tool asks you around corruption, right? The one says, corruption is serious. There are more serious crimes such as murder, which is serious, but there are more serious crimes such as murder, which deserve closer attention. And then on the other side of that, perhaps you lead on the opposite side of that view, and it says, corruption is a criminal act which robs society of fairness and benefits criminals and their cronies at the expense of majority. So depending on how you vote, and we'll, you know, of course, now our team member can continue and you can watch as they go through their answers. None of these, we're not encouraging any particular answer. We're really voting at random here, don't worry. So we're not going to push you towards any sort of direction. So this one, looking at governance, for instance, says the Constitution must be honored as a supreme law of the land. The Constitution protects and defends democracy. On the other side of that, you could rather believe perhaps that the Constitution still needs some work, right? Any sort of surprises that you think that South Africans have in sort of their belief? I mean, as you look at the results as they come in, I don't know if you're able to see a pool of those results, Ray. Are you surprised by perhaps how people view some policies, right? So things like the Constitution, any surprises there on how South Africans are leaning?
Yeah, it's very early days because we launched yesterday, so we haven't looked at any of the incoming sort of information yet. So I can't really answer that.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting is that people don't realize that there are these big choices that are out there in this election. I mean, there are some parties that actually want the constitution abolished altogether, and others that believe that it should never be changed or amended. So, it's quite an interesting polarity to think about. People don't usually think about those sorts of issues when it comes to an election. I think we're quite encouraged by the fact that on social media, because you can share your result. I mean, I've seen EFF people, I've seen DA people proudly sharing their results, saying, "Look what the app said," and obviously trying to use it for their own mobilization and so on.
Yeah.
And encouraging others to do it. So I think that if you go through the 2 steps, you're very likely to come up with 1 or 2 parties that properly represent you.
Yeah, I mean, I was really surprised by what I found. And again, I need to reiterate this. We've been voting at random here, not really choosing, being very specific about policies. But this essentially took us to the EFF being a 59% match. So that's the strongest one for this particular profile that we voted on. Then Action SA, then the ANC. But we've seen really interesting ones where, depending on your policy, and one would think that perhaps if you are a black South African from, a rural area, that you would align with a party that speaks to, I suppose, your demographic. But then depending on your policy direction and where you lean on how the policy direction of the country has gone, you'd be very surprised. People saying, well, it actually says I should vote to ACDP, or, people finding that they're a lot more conservative than what they expect they are, which I found particularly very, very interesting. What's the uptake, though, on the... Yeah, go ahead and tell me about, as you answer that, talk to me about the uptake on the app. I mean, you hope that people are asking themselves these questions and are taking up the survey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's if you come out of it just thinking a bit more about your vote, then I think it's a great achievement. The idea is not to push anyone to vote for any particular party, but to push people to participate and be considerate in that participation. I think you're right about those outcomes that are quite surprising, because when you dig into these parties, you might see a party that has a very strong religious bent, but when you look at their policies, they might be very like ultra free market, on the economy. Yeah. And so, it really does mix and match things. I think out there is quite a lot of people want to see change, want to see transformation, but perhaps are not quite so sure that the government can do it. Yeah. And so they might, in some of the questions, go more for a private sector type of solution. And then the answer that comes out of that might not exactly hit them where they thought they were going to be on those policy issues. Yeah. And so then there's the second part of the survey, which we've just completed now live on air. And of course, because we're media, we've got to be really quite responsible here. You can't be rating the political parties for, which is terrible at honesty in that live on air, because obviously we don't want to sway. Yeah, I would caution you against doing that. Yeah, we obviously don't want to do that. But what it does then is the second part of the survey then asks you what you think about what the party believes in terms of their honesty and integrity, which I thought was a really, really interesting take. I mean, just as we, yeah, go ahead, Ray. Sorry, what we did there actually was we brought in a professional, like a very highly rated human resources professional who does headhunting, and said, how would you set up binary questions when you're looking at recruiting a top manager in a private company? And based on that template, we developed this series of questions. Yeah. Very, very fascinating. It really looks at leadership. Yeah, very, very fascinating. Just quickly give us a link or a website where we can go and take a look at the Vote Navigator. Yes, you can get it at the Brenthurstfoundation.org. And also we're on social media. Just look us up on any of the social media platforms, and you'll see it there.
Yeah, I would love to see on X from our viewers as well if you're surprised by the result that you got on the survey. Ray, an absolute pleasure chatting to you, and we hope to chat again maybe closer to the elections about just the sort of data that you've gathered then from the
That would be great.
yeah, that would be wonderful. Ray Hartley, a research director there with the Brenthurst Foundation. Absolutely fascinating. Go take the survey. I encourage it because I was surprised by the result, and I think you might be